Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run.
Hello, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about my Savage 110 Ultralite build. This is the gun that I carried for pretty much all of my big game hunting trips this last season, and today we're just going to go over what went into this project and how it's turned out. So this rifle started out in life as a bone stock Savage 110 Ultralite. These guns are set apart from other models in the 110 lineup because they come with a skeletonized receiver, a fluted bolt, and most importantly, the Proof Research carbon fiber wrapped barrel. Now, the barrel was one of the biggest features that drew me to purchasing this rifle. The barrels alone, direct from Proof, can usually cost a little bit over $1,000. And these rifles are marketed somewhere in the $1,200 to $1,300 range. Now, I was able to get this rifle new for around $990, which is less than the MSRP of the barrel itself, which is pretty screaming deal. So it was almost like getting the receiver, bolt, and trigger for basically free. First modification I made after getting the original rifle was switching out the stock. Now, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with the stock that Savage sends on these guns from the factory. I think they call it their Accu stock. It's got some decent features to it. Adjustable length of pull. Some of them have adjustable comb height, and they're somewhat rigid for a plastic stock, but I just wasn't quite digging it. Now, there isn't a huge amount of aftermarket stock support for the 110 series receivers. This is due to some design changes that Savage has made over the years, like moving around the placement of the bolt release and a couple other things. So it was a little bit challenging finding an aftermarket stock for it, but at the time that I got the rifle, Stockies had just released a couple models of carbon fiber stocks for the 110 receiver. So I picked this one up, which is a VG2 Stockies carbon fiber stock for the rifle. As far as carbon fiber stocks go, they're pretty aggressively priced. They come in at about $550 or so, and I gotta say I'm pretty happy with this one. It seems very well made. It was properly inletted. The barrel is fully free floated, and I didn't have to do any modification work or anything like that to the stock when I got it for it to fit properly on this receiver. And one quick note, this is not bedded. I haven't felt the need to since I've put it on the gun. I decided to try shooting it without bedding the action, and it's shot perfectly well for my use case. Now, if you're trying to squeeze a little bit more accuracy out of something like this, maybe that's something you look into, but I haven't felt the need to yet. On top, we've got a Picatinny rail made by Leupold, and I've also added a rail on the bottom of the stock from Area 419, so I can run this Atlas bipod off of it. And the Stockies VG2 stock does come with 2 pre-drilled holes, so I didn't have to drill a second hole for mounting up that rail. Now, for a muzzle brake, I went with a Precision Armament M4-72 severe duty brake. Now, since this rifle is chambered in 28 Nosler, I wanted a brake that would give me some pretty serious recoil reduction, and this particular model seemed to hit all the numbers I was looking for. This rifle does come equipped from the factory with the Accu trigger. I've got this one adjusted down pretty low to around 2.5 pounds. I've considered switching it out with a Timney, but it's not something I feel is completely necessary. I've sort of grown accustomed to how this trigger works, and it's fine for what I'm doing. I know some people don't like the Accu triggers, but I've owned several Savages and they've always worked well for me. Now, on the rear of the gun, I do have a shell holder that I got off Amazon. This particular model has a zippered pouch to protect the shells, holds an additional 7 shells and a dope card. And on the side of the receiver, just below the bolt, I have a 2-round shell holder. I am single feeding shells into this gun because I'm seating them out significantly past the max COAL for this receiver length. Currently, my go-to bullet is the 175 grain Hornady ELD-X, which I used to kill 2 elk this last year. I am in the future hopefully going to be trying out some 195 grain burgers as soon as Reloader 33 becomes available again. Now, on the topic of ammunition, let's take this thing out to the range real quick, and we'll see how it's grouping with a couple of different loads. So looking at the group from that 160 grain Nosler ballistic tip, again this is factory loaded ammunition, and we're getting a group size of just over 0.7 of an inch, which for a hunting rifle is just fine. This is probably one of the most economical options in terms of factory 28 Nosler ammo, and usually retails for about $65 per box. This would be a stellar load for deer, and with proper shot placement would be just fine for elk. During our expansion testing with this bullet, we have seen the ballistic tip get torn apart at high impact velocities, so taking that behind the shoulder shot, especially at closer ranges, would be crucial. Onto the 168 grain LRX, we're getting a group size of just over 0.8 of an inch, which is also fine. Sometimes monos can be a bit tricky with accuracy and can require some load tuning. We didn't perform any specific load development for this round. We just picked a powder that we had on hand, which would give us good velocity, and the accuracy turned out to be more than acceptable. We recently published an expansion test on this loading, and as I mentioned in that video, I think this is an everything on the North American continent load in this chambering. We actually got the worst group size with our 175 grain ELDX from Hornady, just over 1 inch at 100 yards, but I will mention that I've shot better groups at the range before. I just don't have any picture or video evidence of that, so I won't make that empirical claim. 1 inch groups at 100 yards is perfectly acceptable for all hunting applications out to any range that most hunters are shooting at. Let's say that hypothetically we're planning on engaging elk out to 600 yards, then at that distance we'd be shooting a little over a 6-inch group. Given a 25-inch vital zone radius on elk, this is perfectly acceptable. I've used this load on elk, and in my opinion the results were stellar. Getting into our load data, if you watched our expansion test on the 168 grain Barnes LRX, you will probably remember seeing this recipe. Both loads represented here are using load data from Nosler's online reloading data. The only difference is the primer. Nosler's data called for, I believe, a Federal large rifle Magnum primer, but I've only had CCI LRMs on hand, so I've been using those with perfectly acceptable results. As mentioned earlier in this presentation with the ELDXs, I was single feeding those. I set the seating depth about 20 thou off the lands and grooves. I haven't played around too much with that seating depth. I tried a COAL of 3.340, but didn't get the results I was looking for, and seating them out further did produce slightly better accuracy for me. And if you are planning on using any of this load data, I would recommend always starting with either the reloading manual recommended seat to depth or max COAL instead of immediately jumping to seating the bullets out closer to the rifling. In some cases it can cause pressure spikes, which at the minimum could greatly reduce your brass life. Now, there are one or two features about this rifle that are a little bit odd. First, when you work the bolt on it, there is a feeling of a little bit of grit to it. And I think this is due to Savage having gone with some very aggressive fluting within the bolt, which, I mean, great, probably helps shave, you know, an ounce off the gun, but it does feel a little bit unrefined when you work it. Of course, this doesn't affect performance at all, and I could see it being a benefit if you were planning on getting the gun really dirty and still wanted to be able to work the bolt without it binding, but I could see it being a little off-putting to somebody who picked one of these up on a store shelf. Another is the trigger. As mentioned, this is Savage's AccuTrigger. I think it's a perfectly fine trigger. It's worked very well for me, but there is the thought in my mind that for a rifle that sells anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500, it would be nice to see a trigger other than the same one you can get on a $300 Axis. Overall though, would I buy one of these again? Yeah, probably. It comes with probably one of the best barrels out there, and it's a relatively inexpensive way to get into a fully built firearm that comes with one of these proof carbon fiber wrap barrels. As we know, the barrel is probably the most important part of the equation, at least as it relates to the rifle itself for accuracy. And although I haven't tried taking this rifle out past 600 yards yet, from the shooting that I have done with it, it's been very consistent, very accurate, very repeatable. 28 Nosler maybe isn't the cartridge that I'd recommend for everyone. Components are expensive, the ammunition's expensive, and overall barrel life is not that great, but if you're hand loading and you're looking for some extreme performance, it's a great cartridge to consider. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.